real quickly, win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else.
He's not going to be removed. He's not going to be removed. He's not going to be removed.
You feel confident in that?
Not by me. My 357 Magnum is comfortable with that. End of story.
And they remove him in the Senate. Mm-hmm. I think it'll cause physical violence in this country that we haven't seen since the first Civil War. I think it'll become the second Civil War.
But what matters to him is re-election, and it's becoming desperate. I believe he is afraid. For all his bluster and bravado, he's a terrified man. He knows the consequences if he loses in 2020. He knows because he knows far better than you and I know, far better than Robert Mueller knew, what his exposure is, what his criminal exposure is. Just today, documents are transferred from Deutsche Bank. This is going to go on for some time, and I genuinely believe that this is a president who does not care about this country. It's Trump first. It's not America first. It's make Trump greater, not make America great again. And I do believe he will do everything he can to prevent our government from stepping in and blocking Russian attempts to disrupt and influence the election.
I would think that there would be a strong movement. It would be very negative. Possible violence. Not that I'm condoning violence. There'll be a lot of mad Americans, possibly 70, 80 million Americans on the loose, not very happy. What we're seeing is a divided country. You know, both sides are dug in. No one's budging.
So in a moment, I'm going to talk to a friend of the beat and Art of the Deal co-author Tony Schwartz. But first, Biden's remarks come amid outrage over absurdly long voting lines in Georgia. And critics point to the Trump administration's sustained attack on democratic norms in this country, from claiming there were up to 5 million illegal votes in 2016. That was not true. That was false. To asking for dirt on Joe Biden from the Ukrainian government. To Trump's son-in-law at one point declining to rule out delaying the 2020 election if they needed to. Now, the other issue, if Trump loses, would he try to cling on to power any way possible? Here's Biden.
This is a strange question to ask an American politician. Have you ever considered what would happen if the election result came out as you being the winner and Trump refused to leave?
Yes, I have. And you have so many rank and file military personnel saying, whoa, we're not a military state. This is not who we are. I promise you, I'm absolutely convinced they will escort him from the White House with great dispatch.
Yesterday I talked to Paul Krugman on the program, and one of the things he had written, and he talked about it last night in the program, was saying that he believes we may not have a functioning democracy in 2020 if the president wins again. Essentially, America as we know it is under threat. And one of the things I asked him, he said, if you're not scared, you're not paying attention.
Well, I don't think you're going to have to wait to see some of Trump's maliciousness. He's already doing tremendous damage, abetted, by the way, by the Senate Republicans who are amazingly undercutting their own institution and its powers for very short-term gain. But Trump, yes, if Trump wins, he'll do great damage. But if he loses the election, he is going to call upon his supporters for violence. There's not going to be a civil war. That's idiocy. But you will see at least isolated violence on the part of crackpot supporters. He will be clinging to the doors of the White House, giving orders to everybody on all sides that the honest people will not obey, the career employees will not obey, the military certainly won't obey.
Joining me now for our State of the Mind franchise, Tony Schwartz, co-author of Art of the Deal and CEO of the Energy Project. He's just published an article for Medium about the dangers of Trump during a time of crisis. Mr. Schwartz, it's great to have you with us. I have to say, I mean, just hearing that as somebody who has covered so many countries, authoritarian countries overseas, where the issue of peaceful transfer of power is distinctly and uniquely American, do you think Biden's warning about Trump trying to steal the election and the fact that he may not even leave office if he does lose are justified?
100%. He's he is, as I've written on Medium, he is a psychopath, meaning he is missing the two ingredients that are critical and common for human beings. Number one, conscience, and number two, empathy. So he lacks both of these qualities, and therefore anything goes for Trump. And think about this. The minute he leaves office, his life, for all practical purposes, from his perspective, is over. Because at a minimum, he loses the vast percentage of his power and his ability to dominate. And believe me, he's gotten used to that, and giving it up is unthinkable.
I wanted to go back to that moment a little bit because I don't think a lot of us just understand what that moment would mean for this country if there isn't a peaceful transfer of power. And as Joe Biden, I think the alarming thing in that interview is he answered that question seriously. That was a serious question from Trevor Noah, and Joe Biden answered it seriously, that it would be the military who would perhaps have to act and dispatch him from that office.
Well, I think that's what it will come down to. And then the question is, on whose side does the military stand? Does it stand on the side of democracy, or does it stand on the side of the commander-in-chief, even if those circumstances suggest he should no longer be the commander-in-chief? And I'm not in any way confident in what that outcome will be, but I have no doubt that Trump is going to do everything he possibly can, including the recruitment of Vladimir Putin, which he hardly needs to do. Putin wants to end democracy in the United States. He will do everything he can, exactly as Biden says, to try to steal this election.
Let me play for you President Trump's recording talking to governors about the unrest in this country, where he says to them they have to dominate protests and, in fact, put them in jail for up to 10 years. Take a listen to this.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a punching jerk. You have to dominate. And most of you are weak. And we're going to slam down very, very strong. But you got to arrest people. You have to track people. You have to put them in jail for 10 years, and you'll never see this stuff again.
What do you think that reveals about how the president views a protest in this country and people's basic liberties? What do you think that reveals about his mindset?
I was fascinated that he used the word dominance or dominate 4 or 5 different times that day, because that morning was the morning that I published my Medium article. And the core point I was making is that we've misunderstood Donald Trump as someone who is motivated by his narcissism, meaning by his desire to be loved, when in fact, true as that is, what deeply, deeply motivates Donald Trump is the need and desire to dominate. He sees the world entirely in terms of win-lose, right-wrong, and pardon this, black-white. And the idea that he would not dominate is precisely what he is trying desperately now to avoid. Now, I will also say this, Eamon. He's going to lose. I believe that now. Now, of course, who knows? Anything could happen. But I think the worm has turned. I think the cat is out of the bag. And I think that the middle part of the electorate that is deciding which candidate they're going to vote for is moving inexorably in the direction of Biden. And I believe that will be the case for the Senate as well. I believe you'll have a Democratic president and 2 Democratic parts of Congress.
Yeah, this election is going to test American democracy, I think, in ways we haven't seen before, certainly in my lifetime. Tony Schwartz, sir, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time as always.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.
If Donald Trump loses his re-election bid and refuses to do a peaceful transfer of power to Joe Biden, what will the military do? That's a big question that's been coming up a lot lately, especially after Trump gave wishy-washy answers about whether or not he would accept defeat if that was the outcome of the general election. Now there are 2 veterans who have addressed this issue in an open letter to the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley. And I want to read you some excerpts from it because it does give you a sense of how real this fear is. And these veterans certainly do want to make sure that there's a plan in place to ensure that Donald Trump stepped down. So John Nagel and retired Army officer Paul Yingling, a retired US Army Lieutenant Colonel, penned an open letter to Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley, warning him that President Donald Trump might refuse to leave office in November and that the US military must be prepared to remove him. So part of the letter reads, the once unthinkable scenario of authoritarian rule in the United States is now a very real possibility. The President of the United States is actively subverting our electoral system, threatening to remain in office in defiance of our Constitution. In a few months' time, you may have to choose between defying a lawless president or betraying your constitutional oath. They continue to write that if Donald Trump refuses to leave office at the expiration of his constitutional term, the United States military must remove him by force, and you must give that order. So they then go into some specific examples that they believe foreshadow Trump refusing to leave office. We'll get to those details in just a minute. But John, I'm curious to hear what you think of this letter and what you think will likely happen if Trump refuses to step down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should say that I, at least at this point, still think that it wouldn't happen. And I know that that's probably, still naive even after the experience of 2020. But I think that we will have an election that will be, affected by voter suppression in a million different forms. That's going to be hampered by the, devastating war against the post office that has continued up until today, in all of those ways. But I think that once we have the election, we will find out who won and that person will become the president. If it doesn't, I think that it's likely to come in the form of Donald Trump trying to stop mail-in ballots from being counted. And the fear there isn't that Donald Trump can just say, it doesn't count. It's that he'll have the single largest media company behind him. Not one Republican senator will be against him. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court could pull a 2000 and say, you know what? No, we're just going with the ballots that were in on election day. We're not going to wait and we're going to count or anything like that. I still don't think that any of those is likely to happen. But if it were to go the route of the Supreme Court stepping in, where effectively it's them that stops Trump from losing rather than Trump just denying that he lost, that I'm more worried about, because we've already been through the experience of 2000 where the Supreme Court decided and it stood. That could happen again. But I don't think that Donald Trump just clearly loses in a landslide and then decides he's not leaving the White House. I don't think that that's likely to work, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, I mean, look, I want to provide some additional evidence to our audience so they can decide for themselves. And I think that this video montage certainly depicts something that we should be at least aware of and should plan for. Let's take a look.
Do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time. I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters and to all of the people of the United States that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win. I don't lose too often. I don't like to lose.
But are you gracious?
You don't know until you see. It depends. I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. I really do.
Are you suggesting that you might not accept the results of the election?
I have to see.
Can you give a direct answer? You will accept the election?
I have to see. look, I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no, and I didn't last time either.
You told Fox News recently that you couldn't say whether you'd accept the results of the 2020 election.
Hillary Clinton never accepted them.
She conceded on. She conceded on.
Doesn't accept.
And one final part of this letter that I want to share with you all, because this was the part that I think concerned me the most, because we've seen a little taste of it. They write that Trump is assembling a private army capable of thwarting not only the will of the electorate, but also the capacities of ordinary law enforcement. When these forces collide on January 20th, 2021, the US military will be the only institution capable of upholding our constitutional order. So what they're referring to there is how Trump has used federal agents against civilians. We certainly saw that happening in Portland. And it is terrifying when you consider that these people certainly did play ball. They took the orders from Trump, and they were absolutely vicious against many peaceful protesters. There were instances of people who were essentially dragged into unmarked cars by federal agents who hadn't identified themselves. It was terrifying, and I don't put it past Donald Trump to use anything and everything in his toolbox to try to stay in power. That's why I was so shocked when Cenk really thought that Trump would step down. He's not gonna step down. He's obsessed with power, he's obsessed with winning. And I think he would do anything to stay in power. And he's currently working on it with what he's doing to the post office and the narrative that he's putting out there about mail-in ballots.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.